And we're live!
Greetings and salutations.
Alright, everybody. Well, I'm glad you could make it. We survived episode 1.
We survived all the feedback you have given us, and we promise to improve.
Oh, yeah, we'll make sure that the audio will be completely distorted.
Yeah.
The dialogue will be completely unintelligible.
Yeah, exactly. We're just gonna start Nazbolism from the time before Christ was born.
Exactly.
As in, like, no more chronology. We're just gonna eyeball it.
Yeah, what we're gonna do is we're gonna start at the beginning, then go to a first person perspective in the middle, and then we're going to have a meandering monologue of somebody within this timeline, but it's not exactly clear. And then we go straight to the end, and then we go back into a circle like.
So they're basically going to use this as an example for gibberish.
Exactly. So, hello everybody. Welcome to episode 2 of Ideologica Obscura. We're going to be doing part 2 of National Bolshevism. And where we left off last time, we left off at the beginning of something wonderful and great.
Yeah, World War II, right?
Yeah, fun for the whole family.
Exactly, especially Germany and the Soviet Union, our main characters.
So what happened? So tell me, Eren, what happened after World War II?
Well,
there were two wolves, right?
There are two wolves inside of you, yes. National Socialism and just socialism.
Exactly.
Yeah. And those wolves had a surgery and now they're changed for the worse.
So, as many of you may know, the world was divided into two sides. One with the capitalist West, with NATO and led by the United States. Yeah. And then you had the East with the communist East with the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact. And that's just brief. That's only for Europe. That doesn't include Asia because you also had China and all that.
But they were aligned countries, and if they weren't aligned, then both sides made them aligned in terms of civil wars and coups.
Yeah.
And just overall they had a good time.
If you didn't become aligned, you would be made aligned.
Exactly. Just ask the CIA.
So this is the world that we are now in. One that is based on capitalism versus communism. Soviet-style communism, to be exact. And there was no real third way. And that was something that many people would look to. I mean, you would see syncretic leaders and the non-aligned movement that would try to seek out a third way.
Yeah, there was a non-aligned movement, but they didn't gain much traction, I'd say.
Yeah, definitely.
Big countries like Egypt and Indonesia were a part of it.
Yeah.
But they weren't that much influential because of the other two sides trying to kill each other.
Yeah, definitely. And so in Europe, you really didn't have generally a third way that fascism was back during, World War II. Many people try to change that, and particularly the far right, which had been completely destroyed, really.
During denazification, which resulted in a lot of Nazi officials being kicked out of their positions, and some of them being executed.
Yeah.
But some still retain their position, but we're not going to talk about those people.
We're not going to talk about Mr. Von Braun. So, because of this, massive change, the post-war far right, went under some ideological shifts. Particularly one that was very striking was one that was, created by the Nazis, actually. And that was the idea of pan-European nationalism. And this started off in 1942 with the Nazis using the idea of a new Europe. This was more of a psychological operation strategy in order to make Europeans believe that the Nazis were protecting them from a scourge of capitalism and communism, and that they would make a unified national socialist Europe that would not be inspired by pan-Germanism or have German economic superiority over them.
Exactly. And they got close.
Yeah.
But then they invaded Russia.
Well, it was likely that they would have never actually had that it would have never actually been an equal relationship. You would have had client states like Vichy France, in which people would be sent off to work as not guest workers, but practically slave labor in a way. And
there would also be a lot of political prisoners that would be sent to camps like Dachau for slave labor as well.
Exactly. But also the idea was that Germany would defend Europe from communism And this was embodied by non-German SS volunteers or other non-German army units fighting against the Soviets on the Eastern Front, Romanians, Hungarians, Italians,
Slovakians, all those,
Slovakians. Noticeably, they did really good job fighting the Soviets.
Yeah, especially in Stalingrad.
Yeah, exactly.
that very important battle that decided everything.
Oh man, yeah, no.
Yeah, no. Shout out to our Romanian audiences. We love you.
Our one Romanian listener. This is for you. We love you. This pan-European nationalism or pan-white nationalism would become the core value of actually contemporary far-right and neo-fascism, particularly in the information age. And this was adopted by French nationalists who rejected Pétain's idea of only French nationalism and sought to work with other whites across Europe. And in some ways, this was actually complemented with another ideological idea that was developed by well-known American fascist Francis Parker Yockey, who argued that for unity of the white world, instead, white nationalists and neo-Nazis should, unite with the Soviet Union to overthrow the Jewish-Israeli yoke that the West lived under. However, this was not widely accepted.
So, as in, the American ideology, the American fascism ideology, was a broader ideology than the European one.
I think it was just for Yockey. I'm not sure about the rest of the American.
Okay, fascism. let's talk about Yockey. So his goal was to unite the entire white world.
Yes.
Against the Jewish-Israeli yoke.
Yes.
But the French way of thinking was just uniting the entirety of Europe rather than the entirety of the white world.
I think, because, they were mainly focused on Eurocentrism. Yockey had this idea of a, imperium, in which, you would have a great Western empire, of a unified white race and everything. And it's interesting that he, sought to unite with the USSR despite them being the ones that destroy the Nazis, which is, a very interesting thing to think about. But this idea of, working with the Soviet Union was not widely accepted in either in the West, in America or in Europe, except for a couple people. And one of those guys is going to be our main character that we're going to follow, because he was responsible for the creation of Belgian National Bolshevism.
Yes.
I know.
We moved from Germany to Belgium.
Yes, exactly. We talk about Belgium being independent, and this is what happens.
Exactly.
Our guy that we're going to follow is a guy named Jean-François Dirialt, who was born in Brussels in 1922. Grew up in a left-wing family and was involved in socialist and anti-fascist movements. However, his politics switched to the far right and became part of a collaborationist grouping.
That's a wild swing of the pendulum.
Exactly, yeah. Following Nazi Germany's occupation of Belgium in 1940. He would eventually associate himself with the Les Amis du Grand Reich Allemand, or Friends of the Greater German Reich, which was a syncretic mix of dissident socialists, Rexists, which are Belgian pro-monarchy fascists.
So rather than a Führer, they wanted the king to be the
main guy.
Main guy.
Yeah, exactly. He himself would later join the Waffen-SS.
And the Waffen-SS is the military arm of the SS in Germany, which committed all the war crimes against all the minorities in Europe.
Basically. Yeah, I mean, it wasn't just the SS. The Wehrmacht themselves were also complicit as well.
Yeah. No, definitely. But still, people tend to see the SS as the black sheep of all the war crimes.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, the SS were probably the more enthusiastic ones to do the war crimes.
Exactly.
And after the war, he was arrested, but was released and became an optometrist.
I mean, again, a wild change in career, but still, I feel like fighting for the German army after the surrender wouldn't have been a good idea.
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't know. I guess you got to have a diverse resume.
Portfolio, yes.
Yeah, got to have a diverse resume. I mean, that's what companies want. They want to see diversity, both in your skills and experiences.
They want to see the violation of the Geneva Convention.
Exactly. So, but a couple of years later, he would return to politics in the 1960s in response to Belgium's decolonization and the Congo crisis, in which he joined a group called the Mouvement d'Action Civique, which sought to bring white colonists back home and oppose decolonization. So this was during an entire period in which, like, part of the Cold War, which was, the end of the empires of Europe,
Yeah.
in which their African and Asian colonies, would separate from their colonial masters, sometimes even violently, such as, like, with Vietnam or Congo in this case.
But Belgium only intervened in Congo to like get Belgian nationals out, like the white people out of the country.
And also to maintain their access to key resources, because, like,
Exactly.
Congo is a very resource-rich area.
But the people there don't have a lot of access to those resources.
No, they don't.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's about maintaining that control on resources, by any means possible, whether that be war, assassination, anything that you gotta do, all that stuff, really, yeah. So this was during a time period in which the empires of Europe were collapsing, and these new colonies would either choose a certain direction. Would they become more capitalist? Would they become socialist? Would they kind of seek their own path? And this was something that was going on, in their colonies. And it was up to the West to make sure that they didn't go communist and that they stayed aligned with them. So with this opposition to decolonization and wanting to, help their fellow white man, he would develop contacts outside of Belgium to create a pan-European nationalist organization, Jeune Europe, or Young Europe in French, in 1962. This group mainly operated in France, and was thus influenced by the change in thinking that we mentioned previously about, the rejection of Pétain's narrow and reactionary nationalism and support the Nazi idea of New Europe.
Yeah, they wanted a new form of nationalism.
Exactly. They wanted a more broader and more, not really inclusive. I guess inclusive.
I mean, I would say it's because it's saying pan-Europe, so I feel like that also includes Yugoslavia.
Actually, yeah, and you are right, because they are inclusive because they have sympathy for Eastern Europeans who were part of an internal Russia, an imagined idea of Russia that was unspoiled by materialism and the influence of the degenerate West.
Which is quite a divergence from the Nazi view of things, because they saw Slavs as subhumans rather than like a part of the Aryan race, even though they had white skin color.
Yeah. I don't think you can think that anymore, because, like, you clearly saw that the Russians curb stomped the fucking Nazis. And if you think that, like, okay, maybe, I think it boils down to this. If you can't beat them, join them. But not entirely. And this thinking was also combined with, like, Yaki's idea of, like, working with communists in order to achieve their goals. So, what were their goals? And we're going to talk about that. Because in 1965, Delialt would create a political party called the Parti Communautaire Européen, or the PCE, which mainly they considered the U.S. as their primary economic, political, and strategic enemy of Western Europe. And that the new collabos, which is French slang for Nazi collaborators, which is very ironic that he's using that term, were those that were undermining the European community by rechanneling the European project towards the formation of a plutocratic republic extending from Frankfurt to San Francisco. I guess that is kind of a bit accurate of the European Union, I guess, today.
Yeah, fair point.
Though,
like, it was a pan-European movement like the European Union, but not, the ideological lens is completely different.
Yeah, it's complete. It's a mix of red and brown, also known as my colonoscopy.
Yeah.
They sought to have Europe become a third power in the Cold War, and were mainly focused in creating a global struggle against U.S. imperialism. Because, I mean, that was the other thing. During this time, for some context, that United States, in order to, deter Soviet aggression, and maintain their, influence and power and trading partners, they created what's it called? The
North Atlantic Treaty Organization.
North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which was a military alliance of Western countries, including Turkey.
Yeah.
And with that, the United States would base military troops in places like Germany, France, Turkey.
Because they were at the frontier of the Soviet Union.
Exactly. So. And Germany as well, because you had West Berlin, and you also had the rest of Western Germany. West Germany, yeah.
West Germany and West Berlin.
West Germany and West Berlin, yes, it's all West. And so they would deploy missiles, and they would deploy big units, and this pissed off a lot of like Europeans who saw like the Yankees coming in and taking over their country. Particularly like leftists as well as like more nationalistic ones.
Yeah, we had something along the lines of that in Turkey as well, because the U.S. troops visited Istanbul for a weekend off, and they were thrown into the Bosphorus by leftist students.
No way.
Yeah.
Oh wow. I mean, but you guys still have Izmir.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah. So you may be asking, so how do you wage a global struggle against the U.S. Imperialism as a what he calls himself a national communitarian, because he's not a communist. Let's be very clear about that. He's very adamant about it. How do you achieve that? This goal of a national communitarian Europe. Well, he says that Western nationalists and Eastern communists should reach an understanding, and that they themselves must wage a guerrilla war, kind of like Mao. He's very about Mao.
Mao Zedong, who is like the famous Chinese communist.
Yes.
Who basically had a civil war against the nationalists, and he won because he had genius tactics.
Yeah.
Like, they were brilliant.
Brilliant guerrilla tactics, with like shadow states, bases and stuff like that.
Bases were like, okay, to summarize it very simply, the Maoist guerrilla strategy was basically that they would conquer a certain amount of territory in different areas of the country, and the goal of these territories would be to unite to form like one state that can combat the opponent of the communist side.
He would try to do this by forging alliances in the East. For example, he would form contacts with the Arab and Muslim world as well. Particularly, he would meet with Syrian and Iraqi ambassadors and Palestinian and Algerian leaders to be interviewed on the PCE's journal, national-européen, and that journal would be distributed in Algeria, and their publication would also featured advertising by the League of Arab States and the PLO, which was the left
Palestinian Liberation Organization.
Yeah, the more left-wing, the more leftist kind of Palestinian nationalist. And the reason why he wanted to get with these groups is so then he could then send his supporters to go there and be trained by these independence fighters, and then they would then form the core of the Popular Liberation Army of Europe. And this would be combined with his attempt at what I would call diplomacy, as allegedly speaking to Zhou Enlai in Budapest. If you don't know, Zhou Enlai was the foreign minister for the People's Republic of China during the 60s. And,
I feel like
70s.
You're the only person that knows that.
Yeah. No, but he allegedly spoke with him and asked him to commit to his grand strategy, which was a quadricontinental war. So what was this quadricontinental quadricontinental guerrilla warfare that Tioyalt was trying to get going? With this Arab nationalist trained army of European nationalists, they would then be sent back to Europe in order to wage a Maoist-style guerrilla war in order to free Europe from American influence and also Soviet, liberate, the Soviet, I guess, it's their client states. And then China would help by waging a conventional war on both parties. Imagine going up to Zhou Enlai and he's like, "What the fuck are you talking about?"
He just has a PowerPoint presentation with 80 slides.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, the tactic is Mexico. We invade the US that way. Ever heard of the Zimmerman telegraph?
I was just imagining, but when I first was researching it, I was just imagining him going up to Zhou Enlai, and Zhou was just like, fuck. And he's probably like, "Man, leave me the fuck alone. I have to deal with a bunch of Maoist French professors who've been asking me, can I wage a Maoist insurrection in Paris? No, you can't, man. No, you fucking can't. That's not the whole idea."
Yeah, I just imagined the guy pestering him for 3 days in Budapest.
Yeah.
I mean, it's quite interesting because the guerrilla bands that went to Palestine, the Bekaa Valley in Lebanon and Palestine, they went because they were left-leaning, so they had to learn how to wage a guerrilla warfare, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But I mean, we're talking about Nazbols here right
exactly.
now. So the PLO is very welcoming.
Yeah.
In terms of ideology.
And I mean, and that's the crazy thing is that they'd be trying to wage a Maoist war. Now, if you gotta understand why we're laughing about like waging a Maoist style guerrilla war in like fucking like downtown Paris or Frankfurt or Brussels. Maoist.
Okay, in Belgium it can't work because like I feel like
really, though.
There isn't a centralized police system.
I
feel like the Flemish and the Wallonians would fight each other more than they would fight each other.
They're just beating. One is beating one side with like what is it called? Stroopwafels,
exactly.
And the other one is beating them with like and with the French fries.
Even though those are also Flemish, but yes.
I mean, oh no, I was gonna say waffles. Yeah, like chocolate waffles. So why it's funny is because that Maoism is mainly for like a peasant revolution. It's about instead of like a communist revolution, which is based on around like the industrial worker. Maoism is based on a peasant revolution because China, as we said in the first episode, is a very peasant-based society.
Yeah, exactly. There weren't a lot of factories in China.
No, they weren't. And you would then have, and then you could also be in the countryside. Then you would wage a war because you'd be a lot more distant from like the cities in the interior, and then you would encircle those cities.
But I mean, those tactics only work in countries where like it's not a strong centralized state.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
Like if it's say like Turkey or France,
or
then
Germany.
Or Germany, then you're not gonna have a easy time just conquering all the regions.
No, you can't go to like a little hamlet in like the middle of like Bavaria and then like try to establish like a Maoist base there. You're gonna get the police are gonna be knocking on your door in like a couple days.
Also, I mean, just the army itself.
Exactly.
Because, for example, ISIS, the Islamic State, also used these tactics in Iraq and Syria, but Syria was in the middle of a civil war, so of course it was going to work there.
And Iraq basically had no government.
Iraq was a failed state. I mean,
it
maybe still is, but that's up to debate.
Yeah, but it's porous.
Yeah, exactly.
It doesn't have any centralized command.
Exactly.
So the idea, and I mean, this is something that like other leftists try to do, is that they tried to wage like an urban Maoist war, like the Baader-Meinhof gang
or the Red Army faction.
The Red Army faction. But they were the Red Army faction.
Okay.
Yeah, and also I think you had some Italians that were fighting in Italy during the years of lead, which was also in the 60s. I mean, the 60s were a crazy time of like left-wing terrorism.
Yeah. And like protesting also, like 1968.
Oh yeah, iconic. 1968, iconic. If you're French, you know what I'm talking about.
Exactly, or Turkish.
Yeah,
or just European in general, man.
Exactly. Yeah, so it's kind of crazy that they would try to do this, but also like working with the Arabs as well. There because Thierry himself was against decolonization, which is crazy to think because like Algeria was a former French colony. Morocco, Syria
was a part of France, which is still very surprising.
Yeah, like, exactly.
Whenever I hear that, I just get surprised. But again, I'm going off in tangents. Let's continue.
By 1969, Thierry would have a political hiatus for 14 years. Don't know.
He was in hibernation.
Yeah, he was in hibernation. Maybe he got back into optometry. Maybe he settled down with a girl.
He was a Nazbol sleeper agent.
Nazbol sleeper agent. Yeah. But you return back in the 1980s and become more Nazbol than ever. Because since the late 60s, he was actually exposed to the ideas of, wait for it, and sneakish!
Yeah, the main character of the first part is back, baby.
Yeah, exactly. He is back, and I think he's dead by now.
He's back with a vengeance.
Yeah. But so, by the 1980s, we're jumping forward in time. His thinking had fundamentally changed in regards to his geopolitical strategy. Did it make more sense? No. In order to counter the U.S., Thierry invited Europe to rethink its relationship with the USSR, contending that European culture could only continue to exist with the help of the Soviet Union. As a quote, this is a big one. The Weltschauung, which is German for worldview, of the Homo novus might possibly emerge from communism, but not from the bric-a-brac of American metaphysics, wherever the hell that means.
Bric-a-brac.
I don't know.
English is a very flexible language.
I didn't know. I don't even understand what any of this means.
Yeah, neither do I.
And that the PCE's rhetoric also changed, with them ending with the denunciation of the, quote, Mongolian hordes crouched behind an Asian Bolshevism, but instead recognized the USSR as, having some pan-Slavic leanings and as ethnically European character. Wow, the Russians are European? I could have never guessed. So, with the rejection of the belief that Russia was intrinsically Asian, as only a Nazi misconception, it was outlined in theoretical texts of the PCE, and of Selyalt himself, and he himself would become a staunch supporter of Russia for the rest of his life. So, and if you thought this ideological shift made them less racist, you'd be wrong. They still believe that
there's a real... Okay, let me read that.
Yeah, you're going to read that.
Because it's deeply associated with the ethnic group I belong to.
Yes.
There's a real will to make the USSR collapse among Jewish American and Zionist American political leaders. So basically the 5 families that ruled the world according to the conspiracy theorists.
Yes. So, thus, with this shift, he believed that, maybe the Soviet Union and Europe was an alliance, and that Europe would eventually actually unify to create one nation. Not a European Union, mind you, but to create a Euro-Soviet Empire, which would, begin from Dublin to Vladivostok. Okay, and you may ask, why? Why on earth would you want to do that?
I feel like they had that question in their minds ever since the episode began.
Exactly. Like, why on earth is this guy doing this?
Why does this exist?
Yeah, exactly. Why does
the
this
ideology,
exist?
not the podcast.
Exactly, yeah. Well, I think both. The main goal was to be able to kick out American influence from Europe, close all the bases, but also do imperialism. If you thought he'd grown out of his initial phase of supporting settler colonialism and imperialism,
but
you would also be wrong.
But Thomas, how dare you say that imperialism is only a capitalist thing?
Oh,
the Soviet Union never engaged in imperialism or socialists.
Oh, my little summer child, you are very wrong.
Yeah, just look at the invasion of Poland.
I was gonna say Afghanistan because that's what was going on at this time in the 80s.
Oof, wild.
Yeah,
that was their biggest mistake.
Oh yeah,
their
definitely.
own Vietnam.
Never go into. I mean, this is one thing that we've got to learn. Is that never invade Afghanistan. Never start a land war in Asia.
They fell for one of the biggest blunders in mankind.
And never deal with a Sicilian when death is on the line. All right.
See, this is us broadening our audience base.
Exactly. I mean, who does it? I mean, this is family-friendly content. Princess Bride. I am Inigo Montoya, who killed my father. Prepare to die. So, initially, with the alliance parties that the USSR would recognize that Africa and the Middle East were part of Europe's sphere of influence. But, with the unification of a Euro-Soviet Empire, they could then recolonize Africa. And basically, the goal was, in order to exploit the natural resources of the African continent and to ensure white supremacy in it.
Damn.
This was part of his, Euro-African theories that developed in the 1950s and 60s, in which, Europe would have direct control. I guess it's, Europe would have direct control over Africa, and that, I guess in some, weird kind of, timeline, Africa would still be part of, European nations in a way.
Algeria.
Yeah, let's say Algeria was part of France, but also was integrated within the European Union.
That sounds crazy, man.
France's France's foreign departments.
Yeah, as in Algeria. In case of Algeria, it was called a department.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm talking about the current ones they have, like Guadeloupe or stuff like that.
Oh yeah, okay.
So yeah, so like no, like Africa would be directly integrated into like Europe as like a both politically, economically, maybe even culturally, with all that imperialism.
I mean, economically, that's the case right now. But
I mean, not in a good way.
Not in a good way, no.
No. So, but in the 80s, the PC had actually died out. I guess when you're trying to do what is it called? You're trying to be a national Bolshevik in Brussels. It doesn't really work.
No. I mean, being a national Bolshevik doesn't work. Period. But
yeah, not really. But then it would be replaced by another party called the Parti communautaire national-européen, or the PCN, which was created by Thiriar's protege, Luc Michel, and also
who's still active,
who's still alive
and roaming the plains of Europe.
Yeah, not just Europe as well. We're gonna talk to him about him later. He's an interesting character. He looks like a pedophile.
I mean, that was already a given.
Like, hold on, let me show you a picture of him. Like, look at this guy.
Yeah, he does look like a pedophile. The Romania Journal.
But like, not the kind of big corporate pedophiles that you would see on Epstein's Island.
No, he's just like the village pedophile.
Yeah, yeah, and also he has certain interests. Oh my god, he has a fedora! That's great.
You've heard it. You've heard it the first time here, folks. He is a Redditor.
He's a Redditor. He's a neckbeard. Well, he's not even a neckbeard. He's a Redditor. Oh my god. That is insane.
Yeah, I know, right?
So, the PCN claimed to be the successor of the PCE. I mean, they have kind of the same logo. And they looked. Their names are very similar, don't they?
Yeah, it's basically the Judean People's Front, or the People's Front of
God
Judea.
Splitter! Well, it's not a splitter because he still used Thiriar's idea, and Thiriar would give his indirect approval of it. So, and during the 80s, Thiriar would actually begin working with a Spaniard named Jose Cuadrado Costa. With them both arguing that only Russia could serve as the cornerstone of a greater Europe. And it was at this time Thiriar began working on his never-completed book called The Geopolitics of the EuroSoviet Empire. These guys, not only did he come up with an insane geopolitical strategy, he also came up with their own potential internal political system, which was a totalitarian political system that was. It gets even more ridiculous.
This guy had a lot of free time.
He did. This totalitarian political system, which would be a form of hyper-communism purged of Marxism.
Hyper-communism purged. So we're purging communism from his founding father.
I guess he didn't like all the different theories of Marxism. And worker control of stuff, and then that the state should control it.
Yeah, I feel like he didn't like the Marx in the areas where he made sense.
Yeah, no, he didn't. He liked it when it was perverted and contorted by Mustache Man.
Exactly, Mustache Man good, Beard Man bad.
And so, yeah. That was the whole idea. You would create the hyper-communism in this EuroSoviet Empire, a national communitarian empire, stretching from a white nationalist one, that'd be stretching from Dublin to Vladivostok, and it would recolonize the African continent, and which would, enrich them.
Yeah.
When he was not calling for neo-imperialism, he was also quoting Mao, Lenin, and Stalin, stating that the new empire would be based on a communism without Marx, which the new leader of the PCN, Luc Michel, had compared to the new economic policy, or the NEP, which was, for some context, the NEP was a policy that was introduced by Lenin in the early days of the Soviet Union, which allowed for some free market capitalism, but under state regulation.
Exactly.
So I guess he's not exactly too horny about the Stalinism of that Ernst Niekisch was like.
Yeah.
And speaking of Ernst Niekisch, he'll be backing with German National Revolutionaries, with one group called the SDVNRAO. I'm not even going to try to say what the actual acronym is. I'm just going to call them the SDV. And their journal, Das Junge Volk, will begin republishing publishing the works of Nietzsche and Pytel. And this would really introduce, bring these guys back actually into the, the ritosphere, I guess, of thinking about the ideas of National Bolshevism. So the far right in Europe that would be developing in the 1990s, and the 80s, sought to take the autarkic elements of Soviet-style communism while mixing it with the desire to have a homogeneous racial empire of Europe. And this one woman that wrote one of the main sources, I think it's like Dr. Laroule. She's fantastic. Go read her book. It's in this description. She said that National Bolshevism actually saved the French and Belgian far right since they were able to carve out their own niche in their political landscape. However, we get to the year 1991. The Soviet Union was collapsing, and the Iron Curtain had already been broken down, and the Warsaw Pact had pretty much evaporated. Glasnost and Demokratizacja, the reforms that liberalize, media, information, the economy, the political system.
Also gave a lot of rights to Eastern European countries.
Exactly, that was done by Gorbachev. Failed to reform the Soviet Union and prevent its stagnation.
Failed is a massive understatement.
Yeah. Worst of all, McDonald's had already come to the USSR in 1990.
And Gorbachev was in a Pizza Hut commercial. Yes, this is fact.
You can find it on YouTube. It's amazing to watch. The Cold War was seemingly over, and with the apparent victory of neoliberal capitalism and the beginning of the long night of the end of history. But the problem with ideas is that they don't die, they adapt, they continue, or they lay dormant in the minds of men. So, despite the end of the Soviet Union, National Bolshevism would continue. In fact, it was here that it evolved. Because in 1991, there was a thing called the European Liberation Front, not to be confused with one that was created in the 1950s by British fascist and the American fascist Francis Barkayaki, which was created under the influence of Thieriot and a Russian ideologue named Alexander Dugin.
Oof. That's a spicy one, that one.
Oh, Dugin comes up a lot.
Oh, yeah.
Dugin's going to come up a lot in the future. Not just for National Bolshevism, but for other ideologies. Thieriot's ideas, of this national communitarianism, and combined with greater part of the larger. So, for clarification, national communitarianism is just a fancy way of saying National Bolshevism, specifically to what Thieriot's insane crackpot ideas. And they're right in his ideas that were influenced by National Bolsheviks of Ernst Niekisch and Otto Pytel, will be popularized in Russia by Dugin in 1992. And that same year, Thieriot would come to Moscow to actually meet the so-called National Patriotic Opposition. Because, it was during this time that actually people would, still pine for the days of the Soviet Union, even if they were right-wing. This is now something we'll be talking about in the third episode. However, Thieriot would die shortly after, in 1992, dying at the age of 70.
He lived a long and fulfilling life.
Yes, as a optometrist, Nazi collaborator,
and a pseudo-intellectual.
The PCM would live on, though, with Luc Michel seeking to build upon Thieriot's legacy. He would start in 1993 seeking to replace the ELF, the European Liberation Front, with a new European-level trans-ideological organization, which would be called the Black, Red, Green Front. So I guess that involves black as in, national communitarianism, far-right stuff as well. Red as in, communist, Maoist, Stalinists, and green, environmentalists. Like we said, that was the origin myth for the PCN, that was the idea of, Maoists, national revolutionaries, and environmentalists coming together in order to oppose American imperialism. And quote, this is from LaRue's book, the first publication launched by the PCN after breaking with the ELF presented the reader with an editorial title, quote, Leader, accompanied by a photograph of the PCN leader, Luc Michel, standing under a portrait of Lenin. Michel would also declare, for national communism, or European National Bolshevism, which we prefer to call communalism, the Battle of Moscow was a landmark. From now on, European national communism is no longer just an activist praxis. And some vanguard organizations like the National European Communitarian Party or Russian National Salvation Front, it is above all a community of activists, a reality of flesh and blood, sacrifice and hope. End quote.
Yeah.
So, the PCN had the idea that Russia could serve as an external base for European nationalists. This was still building off the idea that they could still wage guerrilla war in fucking Europe. Similar to the ideas of Tiliav. This alliance of both Russia and Europe, they hoped would create this idea of having a left-wing and Eastern aesthetic for the Western Europe's radical far right, which was a good way to, it's like a brand change, or guess. Like, they're rebranding themselves, because having themselves branded with association of these and the aesthetics of fascist regimes doesn't vibe with a lot of people.
Yeah, especially after World War II. It doesn't sound like a good time.
And this was still in the 90s, so, this was a great year for, World War II. This was a great decade for, World War II movies.
Yeah, exactly.
You had, what was it?
The wound was still open.
Yeah, the wound was very much opened. It's not like now, where people would, blatantly, try to say, actually, you know what, yes, let's do the Nazi Germany again.
And they would, idealize the Nazi aesthetic.
Exactly.
As if it was a good thing.
Yeah, because that's what's going on now, which is very interesting to see that, some people would, that no longer have this problem with the aesthetic of associating with fascist regimes. I might be wrong on that, but I think this is what we can see based on what LaRue wrote. So, with that, they would try to, paint themselves red and present themselves as, a new alternative. And especially, with the end of history, I mean, this is something that is just, a big idea that we, in our major, we talk a lot about, because, in the first year, especially.
Oh, yes, The End of History. Everyone's favorite book to talk about in our major.
The End of History, if you don't know, was from an article written by a guy named Francis Fukuyama that argued that ideological development of humanity had reached its pinnacle, and this was, in a way, the end of history, because you would no longer see the ideological developments, in which neoliberal capitalism had succeeded and had triumphed over historical ideologies of fascism and communism. He would say that, conflicts this would be the end of conflicts and stuff like that, and that only conflicts would occur with, what he would call historical countries.
Historical countries, so autocratic countries that didn't have the rule of law as the dominance.
Exactly. So, you would still, see, the Gulf War was an example of a Fukuyamian, kind of, calling, getting rid of, or both Gulf Wars were, getting rid of, all these historical states, eventually, North Korea and all these autocracies that didn't.
Because it was based on the theory of the democratic peace theory, where it basically entailed that if you're a democracy, then you're not gonna go to war with other democracies.
Yeah.
You have other ways to work your business out.
Yeah, exactly. And the end of history was at a time when Western domination was undisputed.
Yeah.
Russia had completely fallen apart. China hadn't reached its level of international boogeyman as it has now.
Yeah.
And no other country was either willing or capable of opposing the United States on the global stage. But that's where I want to end the episode today, with the end of the Cold War.
Yes.
And the creation of the PCN, the development of National Bolshevism in Western Europe beyond Germany into the Francophone sphere, and also the beginning of National Bolshevism in Europe, because we will see that in the next episode with Alexander Dugin and a certain Eduard Limonov.
Contemporary National Bolshevism, baby.
Yeah, exactly. We're gonna be, and I mean the PCN. We'll talk about it because it's still going on today.
Yeah.
But yes, I want to thank everybody for tuning in and listening to the podcast. We've loved your viewership. I mean, this has really gotten us excited and everything.
Yeah, also your feedback, which was very helpful.
Yeah, no, I'll make sure that you guys can hear this and everything. And thank you especially to our one Bulgarian listener, and the entire population of Malta.
Yeah, all two of them.
All two of them. Yeah, but thank you, and thank you for tuning in to episode 2, part 2 of National Bolshevism by Ideologica Obscura, and we'll see you in episode 3.
The final part.
Bye-bye!